I was staring at my empty barn when I realized someone had actually stolen my John Deere tractor in broad daylight, and the rage that filled me was unlike anything I had felt in my 20 years of owning property in Cedar Ridge, Montana. The morning had started normal enough. I woke up at 5:30 like always, made myself coffee, and planned to plow the back 40 acres before the snow got too deep. Winter in Montana does not wait for anyone, and I had been putting off clearing that section of my property for 2 days already. My neighbor, Tom Jenkins, had warned me about leaving equipment outside, but I never thought anyone would have the guts to just take a 4-ton piece of machinery from my property. I walked around the barn 3 times, thinking maybe I had moved it and forgotten. But no, the tire tracks in the light snow were clear as day. Someone had driven my tractor right off my property, heading west toward the main subdivision roads. My property sat on the edge of the Cedar Ridge Estates, a sprawling homeowner association community that had grown up around the original family farms about 15 years ago. I had refused to sell my land to the developers, which meant I owned 5 acres that bordered the HOA community, but was not part of it. This distinction had caused me nothing but headaches for the past decade. I pulled out my phone and called the Lewis and Clark County Sheriff's Office. The dispatcher, a woman named Marie who I had gone to high school with, answered on the 3rd ring. "Lewis and Clark County Sheriff, what is your emergency?" "Marie, it is Ian Morrison. Someone stole my tractor from my property sometime last night or early this morning." "Your John Deere?" "The big one you use for the farm work." "That is the one. I have tire tracks leading toward the Cedar Ridge subdivision. Can you send someone out?" "I will get Deputy Harrison over there within the hour. Do not follow those tracks yourself, Ian." If someone took equipment that size, let us handle it. I agreed and hung up, but I was already pulling on my winter boots and heavy coat. The temperature was hovering around 20 degrees and the wind was picking up. I was not going to chase anyone down, but I could at least see where the tracks led before they got covered by new snow. The tracks were easy enough to follow. They went straight down my gravel drive, turned left onto Morrison Lane, which was technically my private road but connected to the HOA street system, and then disappeared onto Palmer Drive, one of the main roads that wound through Cedar Ridge Estates. I stopped at the edge of where my property ended and the HOA land began. I had learned the hard way not to set foot on their precious community roads without a good reason. Deputy Marcus Harrison arrived about 45 minutes later, pulling his cruiser up next to where I stood on my property line. Marcus was a good guy, former military, and he did not put up with nonsense from anyone. "Morning, Ian. Marie said you had your tractor stolen." "Sometime between midnight and 5:30 this morning. Tracks lead right into the subdivision." Marcus examined the tire tracks, took some photos with his phone, and wrote notes in his little notebook. "That is a distinctive tread pattern. Should not be too hard to find if it is still in the area. You have any enemies? Anyone who might want to mess with you?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Just the entire Cedar Ridge Estates HOA board, but I cannot imagine even they would be stupid enough to steal a tractor." "What has been going on with them lately?" "Same as always. They keep trying to force me to join their HOA, keep sending me violation notices for things that are not on their property, keep threatening legal action. Last month their president, Deborah Patterson, sent me a certified letter demanding I pay $3,000 in back fees for road maintenance." Marcus looked up from his notebook. "But you are not part of the HOA." "Exactly. I told her where she could stick her invoice." "My lawyer sent her a cease and desist letter. That was about 3 weeks ago. And you think she might have taken your tractor as retaliation?" I do not want to accuse anyone without proof, but it would not surprise me. Marcus nodded slowly. Let me drive through the subdivision and see if I can spot it. I will give you a call if I find anything. In the meantime, file a formal stolen property report online and email me any documentation you have about the tractor, serial numbers, photos, purchase receipts, all of that. I thanked Marcus and headed back to my house, already pulling up the documents on my phone. The tractor had cost me $48,000 new 3 years ago. It was not just a piece of equipment, it was essential to how I maintained my property and made a living. I ran a small organic farming operation, sold vegetables to local restaurants and at the farmers' market during summer. Without the tractor, I was dead in the water. About 2 hours later, Marcus called me back. I could hear the frustration in his voice immediately. Ian, I found your tractor. That is great. Where was it? That is the problem. It is sitting in the Cedar Ridge Estates community maintenance yard, and according to Deborah Patterson, they have legal right to it. I felt my blood pressure spike. Legal right? It is my tractor. What is she talking about? She is claiming that because you use Morrison Lane to access your property, and Morrison Lane connects to their road system, you owe road maintenance fees. She said they seized the tractor as collateral for unpaid fees totaling $9,000. $9,000. It was $3,000 last month, and they cannot just seize my property. That is theft. I agree with you, but she has some kind of documentation she showed me. HOA bylaws, easement agreements, a whole stack of papers. She is claiming it is a civil matter, not criminal. Marcus, they came onto my property and took my equipment without permission. That is theft. I do not care what their fake documents say. I hear you and I agree. But here is the situation. I can arrest her for theft right now, but she is going to claim she had legal authority. This is going to turn into a mess that will end up in court anyway. Or you can file a formal stolen property report, which I will support fully, and we can press charges. That way everything is documented correctly. I took a deep breath, trying to calm down. What do you recommend? File the report. Press charges. I will include in my report that I located the tractor on HOA property and that Patterson claimed they seized it for unpaid fees. The county attorney can sort out whether she had any legal standing, but between you and me, I do not think she has a leg to stand on. Okay, I will file the report right now. Can you at least document the tractor's location and condition? Already did. Took photos and video. I also informed Patterson that the tractor is now evidence in a potential theft investigation, and she cannot move it or use it until this is resolved. How did she take that? Marcus laughed. About as well as you would expect. Lot of yelling about property rights and HOA authority. I told her if the tractor moves before this is sorted out, I will arrest whoever moves it for tampering with evidence. After I hung up with Marcus, I immediately filed the stolen property report online. The form was straightforward enough. Description of property, estimated value, last known location, any suspects. When I got to the suspect section, I did not hesitate. I listed Deborah Patterson and the Cedar Ridge Estates HOA board. I spent the rest of the day calling my insurance company, my lawyer, and trying to figure out how I was going to manage my property without the tractor. My lawyer, Robert Chen, was based in Helena and had been handling my disputes with the HOA for the past 2 years. Ian, this is escalating beyond the usual HOA nonsense, Robert said when I explained what had happened. Taking someone's property is serious. Even if they believed they had some kind of right to do it, which they absolutely do not, the correct process would be to get a court order first. So what do? I am going to file an emergency motion for return of property. We should be able to get a hearing within a few days. In the meantime, do not contact Deborah or anyone else on the HOA board. Let the criminal investigation and the civil case proceed separately. The fact that the deputy found the tractor on their property and documented everything is huge for us. Robert, I need that tractor back. I have work that needs to be done before the ground freezes solid. I understand. I will do everything I can to expedite this. That evening I got a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered it. Is this Ian Morrison? A woman's voice, sharp and officious. Who is calling? This is Deborah Patterson, president of the Cedar Ridge Estates HOA. I understand you filed a police report claiming your tractor was stolen. It was stolen. You took it from my property. We repossessed equipment that was being used on our roads without proper payment of maintenance fees. That is not theft, Mr. Morrison. That is enforcement of our HOA covenants. I am not part of your HOA, Deborah. We have been over this 100 times. Morrison Lane is part of our road system and is maintained by HOA fees. You use that road daily. You owe us for that maintenance. Since you refused to pay, we exercised our right to seize assets. You do not have that right. Morrison Lane is my private road that connects to your subdivision. I have never agreed to any HOA fees, and you certainly do not have the right to come onto my property and take my equipment. Our attorney disagrees. And you will find that we have documentation going back to the original subdivision plat that shows Morrison Lane as part of the Cedar Ridge road system. Then your attorney is wrong, and your documentation is fraudulent. I have the deed to my property and the easement agreements. Morrison Lane is mine. Deborah's voice got colder. Mr. Morrison, I am calling as a courtesy to inform you that your tractor will be put to use maintaining our roads until such time as you pay your outstanding fees, which now total $9,000 plus $3,000 in repossession costs. You use my tractor and I will add that to the charges. That is unauthorized use of stolen property. Good luck with that, Mr. Morrison. Our attorney assures us we are well within our rights. She hung up before I could respond. I immediately called Marcus Harrison and left him a voicemail about the conversation. Then I called Robert Chen and did the same. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured Deborah and her cronies using my tractor, possibly damaging it, definitely racking up hours on the engine that I would have to pay for in maintenance. The whole situation was insane. The next morning, I was up before dawn again. I made coffee and was sitting at my kitchen table reviewing my property documents when I heard an engine outside. A big engine. My tractor's engine. I rushed to the window and saw my John Deere driving past my house, heading down Morrison Lane toward the main subdivision. There was a man I did not recognize in the driver's seat, and following behind the tractor was a pickup truck with Cedar Ridge Estates HOA printed on the side. I grabbed my phone and called 911. This is Ian Morrison at 4782 Morrison Lane. The tractor that I reported stolen yesterday is currently being driven past my house by someone from the HOA. Deputy Harrison told them not to move it. Stay inside your house, Mr. Morrison. I am dispatching units now. I watched through my window as the tractor continued down the lane. The driver seemed to know what he was doing, which made sense if the HOA had hired him specifically to operate equipment. The pickup truck followed at a safe distance. 2 sheriff's cruisers arrived within 10 minutes, coming from opposite directions to block off the area where Morrison Lane met Palmer Drive. I saw Marcus Harrison get out of one vehicle, and another deputy I did not recognize got out of the second. I grabbed my coat and headed outside, staying on my property but close enough to see what was happening. Marcus had stopped the tractor and was talking to the driver, who had climbed down from the seat. The pickup truck had pulled over, and a woman got out. Even from a distance, I could recognize Deborah Patterson's distinctive purple winter coat. The conversation looked heated. Deborah was gesturing emphatically, pointing at documents she had pulled from her truck. Marcus was shaking his head, his body language clearly indicating he was not buying whatever she was selling. The tractor driver stood off to the side, looking uncomfortable. After about 15 minutes, Marcus walked over to where I was standing. "Ian, I am going to need you to come verify this is your tractor and that you did not give anyone permission to use it." I walked over with Marcus. Up close, I could see Deborah's face was red with anger or cold, probably both. The tractor driver was a younger guy, maybe mid-20s, wearing work overalls and looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. "This is my tractor," I confirmed. "Serial number JD 48,392,847, purchased from Helena Tractor Supply in March of 2022. I have never given anyone permission to operate it, and I certainly did not give this man or the HOA permission to take it from my property." "Mr. Morrison, we have already explained that we seized this equipment as part of our fee enforcement," Deborah said, her voice tight with barely controlled fury. "Madam, I explained yesterday that you cannot seize someone's property without a court order," Marcus said. "I specifically told you not to move this tractor. It is evidence in an ongoing investigation. Your investigation is harassment of a lawful homeowner association performing its duties. Madam, I need you to step over to my vehicle." "You too, sir," Marcus said to the tractor driver. "Am I being arrested?" Deborah demanded. "We are going to have a conversation about theft and tampering with evidence. Whether that leads to arrest depends on your cooperation." I watched as Marcus led Deborah and the driver to his cruiser. The other deputy, whose name tag read Williams, stayed with me and the tractor. "Hell of a morning," Deputy Williams said. "You have no idea. This HOA has been harassing me for years, but stealing my tractor is a new low. HOAs can be tricky. Some of them think they are their own little governments. Well, hopefully this one is about to learn they are not above the law." After about 20 minutes, Marcus came back. "Ian, I am arresting Deborah Patterson for theft over $5,000 and tampering with evidence. The driver, his name is Kyle Stevens, is cooperating. He says he was hired by the HOA just yesterday to operate equipment and was told the tractor belonged to them. He had no knowledge it was stolen. What happens now? I am going to have you drive your tractor back to your property. Deputy Williams will follow you to document everything. I need you to secure it somewhere where the HOA cannot access it again. A locked barn would be best. I can do that. After that, you will need to come to the station and give a formal statement. Bring any documentation you have about your ownership of the tractor and your property boundaries." I climbed up into the tractor, feeling a surge of satisfaction as the engine rumbled to life. It felt good to have my property back, even if this whole mess was far from over. I drove slowly back up Morrison Lane, with Deputy Williams following in his cruiser. Behind us, I could see Marcus putting Deborah into the back of his vehicle. She was yelling something, but I could not hear what over the tractor's engine. Back at my barn, I parked the tractor inside and used a heavy chain and padlock to secure the barn doors. It was probably overkill, but I was not taking any chances. Deputy Williams documented everything with photos and video. "You should consider getting a security camera system," he suggested. "Something that covers your barn and driveway. Already ordered one. Should be here tomorrow." After Deputy Williams left, I grabbed my folder of property documents and headed to the sheriff's station in Helena. The drive took about 30 minutes, and I spent most of it on the phone with Robert Chen, updating him on the morning's events. "This is actually good for us," Robert said. The fact that she moved the tractor after being specifically told not to by law enforcement shows contempt for authority and strengthens the criminal case. I am going to push hard on the civil side to get sanctions against the HOA for this behavior. At the sheriff's station, I spent 2 hours giving my statement to a detective named Sarah Morales. She was thorough, asking detailed questions about my history with the HOA, the specific incidents of harassment, the documentation I had about my property boundaries and ownership. "Mr. Morrison, I am going to be straight with you," Detective Morales said. "This case is going to attract attention. HOAs have a lot of legal gray area in Montana, and there are going to be people who think Patterson had some kind of right to do what she did. But from what I am seeing in your documentation, and based on Deputy Harrison's initial investigation, I think we have a solid theft case. What about the tampering with evidence charge? That one is rock solid. Harrison explicitly told her not to move the tractor. She moved it anyway. That is textbook tampering. When will this go to court? Patterson will be arraigned tomorrow. The county attorney will decide whether to proceed with charges. Given the dollar amount involved and the circumstances, I expect they will prosecute." I left the sheriff's station feeling cautiously optimistic. It was surreal to think that Deborah Patterson, who had made my life miserable for years with her petty complaints and threats, was sitting in a jail cell. Part of me felt bad about it, but a larger part felt vindicated. That evening, my phone started ringing off the hook. Word had spread through Cedar Ridge Estates about Deborah's arrest, and apparently several HOA board members wanted to talk to me. I let every call go to voicemail. On Robert's advice, I was not talking to anyone from the HOA without my lawyer present. The voicemails were a mix of apologetic and threatening. One board member, a man named Craig Sutton, left a rambling message about how this was all a misunderstanding and they wanted to work things out. Another board member, a woman named Patricia Winters, left a message accusing me of destroying the HOA's reputation and threatening legal action. I saved all the voicemails and forwarded them to Robert and Detective Morales. The next day, I drove back to Helena for Deborah's arraignment. The courtroom was packed with people from Cedar Ridge Estates, some supporting Deborah and others, I assumed, just curious about the spectacle. I sat in the back, trying to stay inconspicuous. Deborah appeared in an orange jumpsuit, looking exhausted and angry. Her attorney, a slick-looking guy in an expensive suit, argued for her release on her own recognizance. The prosecutor, an assistant county attorney named Jennifer Walsh, argued that Deborah had already shown disregard for law enforcement authority and was a flight risk. The judge, an older woman named Judge Barbara Hartman, listened to both sides and then set bail at $25,000. Deborah's face went pale, but she nodded. The judge also issued a protective order requiring Deborah to stay at least 500 feet away from me and my property. As I was leaving the courthouse, a reporter from the Helena Independent Record approached me. "Mr. Morrison, can I ask you a few questions about the HOA dispute?" I almost said no, but then I reconsidered. Maybe it was time to let the public know what had been going on. "Sure, but only about the facts of the case. I am not going to trash anyone personally." The reporter, whose name was Amanda Pierce, asked intelligent questions about the history of my dispute with the HOA, the specific incident with the tractor, and what I hoped would come from the criminal case. "I just want what I think most people want," I told her. "To be left alone to live on my own property in peace. I am not part of the Cedar Ridge Estates HOA. I have never agreed to be part of it." I should not have to pay fees for services I do not use, and they certainly should not be able to come onto my property and take my equipment. What do you say to HOA members who argue you benefit from the road maintenance since you use Morrison Lane to access the main highway? Morrison Lane is my private road. I maintain it myself. Yes, it connects to the Cedar Ridge road system, but that is because the subdivision was built around existing properties like mine. I did not ask for them to build there. They chose to develop land around me. The article came out the next day, and it was fair and balanced. Amanda had also interviewed several Cedar Ridge residents, and the responses were mixed. Some supported the HOA and thought I should pay maintenance fees. Others thought the HOA had overstepped and stealing someone's tractor was indefensible regardless of the underlying dispute. The article sparked a broader conversation in Lewis and Clark County about HOA authority and property rights. The local TV news picked up the story, and suddenly, I was getting calls from news stations in Missoula and Billings wanting interviews. I declined most of them, but I did agree to do one interview with a reporter from KRTV in Great Falls who seemed genuinely interested in the legal issues rather than just the drama. That interview aired during the evening news, and my phone exploded again with calls and messages. Meanwhile, Robert Chen was making progress on the civil side. He had filed an emergency motion for return of property, which was technically moot since I already had my tractor back. But he amended it to a motion for sanctions against the HOA and for a declaratory judgment that I was not subject to HOA fees or authority. The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks out, which gave both sides time to prepare. Robert warned me that the HOA's attorney would likely argue that even if Deborah's actions were wrong, it did not mean I was exempt from HOA fees. We need to establish clearly that Morrison Lane is your private property and that the original subdivision plat does not give the HOA any authority over it, Robert explained during a meeting at his office in Helena. We spent hours going through old property records, easement documents, and the original subdivision plat from when Cedar Ridge Estates was first developed. What we found was interesting. The subdivision plat did show Morrison Lane, but it was clearly marked as a private road with an easement for access. The easement allowed the subdivision to connect to Morrison Lane, but did not transfer ownership or maintenance responsibility to the HOA. This is exactly what we need, Robert said, making copies of the documents. The HOA has been operating under a fundamental misunderstanding of the easement. They think because they have access to your road, they have authority over it. That is not how easements work. So I have been right all along. Yes, and more importantly, we can prove it. 2 days before the civil hearing, I got a call from Craig Sutton, the HOA board member who had left the apologetic voicemail earlier. He asked if we could meet to discuss a settlement. I called Robert immediately. Should I talk to him? Not alone. But if he wants to make a settlement offer, I should be there. Let me call him and set up a meeting at my office. The meeting was scheduled for the next afternoon. I drove to Helena with a sense of curiosity. What could the HOA possibly offer that would make up for what they had put me through? Craig Sutton showed up with Patricia Winters and the HOA's attorney, whose name was Donald Reid. The atmosphere in Robert's conference room was tense. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," Craig began. He was a soft-spoken man in his 60s, and he genuinely seemed uncomfortable with the whole situation. "The board has been discussing the situation, and we feel there may have been some misunderstandings." "Misunderstandings," I said, unable to keep the edge out of my voice. "Your president stole my tractor." "Deborah acted without full board approval," Patricia interjected. She was a thin woman with perfectly styled hair and an air of superiority that immediately rubbed me wrong. "The board did not authorize the seizure of your equipment." "That is interesting," Robert said. "Do you have minutes from board meetings that document the decision-making process around enforcement of fees against Mr. Morrison?" Donald Reid, the HOA attorney, cleared his throat. "My clients are prepared to offer a settlement. They will drop all claims for fees against Mr. Morrison, acknowledge that Morrison Lane is his private property, and agree not to pursue any future fee enforcement against him. In exchange, Mr. Morrison will drop the criminal charges against Mrs. Patterson and agree not to sue the HOA for damages." I looked at Robert, who gave a small shake of his head. "That is not going to work," Robert said. "First, Mr. Morrison cannot drop the criminal charges. That is up to the county attorney. Second, my client has suffered actual damages from this incident. His tractor was taken and used without permission. He lost work time, he incurred attorney fees, and he suffered emotional distress from the harassment." "What number are we talking about?" Donald asked. Robert slid a paper across the table. $150,000. Craig Sutton's eyes went wide. "We do not have that kind of money in the HOA reserves." "Then you should have thought about that before your president decided to commit grand theft," Robert said. Patricia leaned forward. "You are trying to bankrupt the HOA. There are 230 families in Cedar Ridge Estates. You are going to hurt all of them just to get revenge on Deborah." "I am not trying to hurt anyone," I said. "But you have been harassing me for years. Sending me fake invoices, threatening legal action, putting notes on my mailbox, and now stealing my equipment. This has to stop, and apparently the only way to make it stop is to hit you where it hurts." "We could agree to 50,000, Donald offered. Robert shook his head. 150,000, and that is before we get into punitive damages. Montana law allows for treble damages in cases of willful and malicious conduct. If this goes to trial and a jury decides your client acted maliciously, which stealing a man's tractor certainly qualifies as, we could be looking at $450,000. The room went silent. Craig looked sick. Patricia's face had gone from superior to frightened. Donald was scribbling notes on his legal pad. "We need to discuss this with the full board," Craig finally said. "You have until tomorrow at 5 p.m., Robert said. "After that, the offer goes up to 200,000 and we file additional claims." The HOA representatives left, and Robert turned to me with a satisfied expression. "That went well," he said. "You think they will pay?" "I think they are realizing how much trouble they are in. Between the criminal case and the civil liability, the HOA is facing existential problems. If Deborah gets convicted, which looks likely, the HOA's insurance probably will not cover her actions because they were criminal. That means the HOA is on the hook directly." "Good." The next afternoon at 4:30 p.m., Donald Reid called Robert. They would agree to the $150,000 settlement, paid in 3 installments over 6 months. They would also sign a binding agreement acknowledging that Morrison Lane was my private property, that I was not subject to HOA authority or fees, and that they would not contact me or set foot on my property for any reason except in cases of genuine emergency. Robert negotiated a few more details, including a clause that if they violated the agreement, the full amount would become immediately due plus additional penalties. By 6 p.m., we had a draft settlement agreement. "What about the criminal case?" I asked. "That proceeds independently. The county attorney is not going to drop theft charges just because there is a civil settlement. But this settlement does show that the HOA acknowledges wrongdoing, which strengthens the criminal case." 2 days later, I was back in court for the civil hearing, where the settlement was presented to Judge Hartman. She reviewed the terms carefully, asked both sides if they agreed voluntarily, and then approved the settlement. "Mr. Morrison," Judge Hartman said, looking directly at me, "I hope this resolves the disputes between you and the homeowner association. However, I want to note for the record that the conduct described in this case is deeply troubling. Property rights are fundamental in Montana, and no organization, no matter how well-intentioned, has the right to seize someone's property without due process." She turned to the HOA representatives. "I suggest your board seek new leadership and legal counsel. The approach you have taken here was not only illegal but profoundly unwise." After the hearing, reporters swarmed us outside the courthouse. I gave a brief statement thanking the sheriff's office and the court system for taking property rights seriously, and then Robert and I left. The criminal case moved forward over the next few months. Deborah Patterson's attorney tried several motions to dismiss, arguing that she had acted in good faith based on a reasonable interpretation of HOA authority. The prosecutor, Jennifer Walsh, demolished those arguments with the documentation we had provided showing that Deborah had been repeatedly informed that the HOA had no authority over my property. In March, the case went to trial. I testified about the long history of harassment from the HOA and the specific incident with the tractor. Marcus Harrison testified about finding the tractor on HOA property and Deborah's statements claiming legal authority. Detective Morales testified about the investigation and the evidence of theft. Deborah's attorney put her on the stand, where she tried to paint herself as a dedicated volunteer trying to maintain a community. But under cross-examination from Jennifer Walsh, Deborah was forced to admit that she had been warned multiple times by her own attorney that her approach to me was legally questionable. She also admitted that the decision to seize the tractor was hers alone, and that several board members had advised against it. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning guilty verdicts on both counts: theft over $5,000 and tampering with evidence. At sentencing 2 weeks later, Judge Hartman gave Deborah 2 years in prison, with all but 6 months suspended. She would serve 6 months in the Lewis and Clark County Detention Center, followed by probation. She was also ordered to pay restitution of $48,000, the value of the tractor, even though I had gotten it back. The judge explained that the restitution was for the use of the tractor and the potential damage, wear and tear. Additionally, Judge Hartman imposed a $5,000 fine and ordered Deborah to complete 200 hours of community service after her release. "Miss Patterson," Judge Hartman said at sentencing, "you held a position of trust in your community. You were elected to lead a homeowner association, to help maintain property values and neighborhood harmony. Instead, you used that position to harass a neighbor and ultimately to commit theft. You showed disrespect for property rights, for law enforcement, and for the judicial system. I hope you use your time in custody to reflect on these choices." Deborah was led away in handcuffs, crying. Part of me felt bad watching it, but mostly I felt relief. It was finally over. In the months that followed, Cedar Ridge Estates underwent significant changes. The HOA board held a special election and replaced Deborah and Patricia, who resigned under pressure. The new board president, a reasonable guy named Mark Thompson who had actually supported me during the dispute, reached out to apologize on behalf of the community. "A lot of us did not know the full extent of what was happening," Mark told me over coffee at a diner in Helena. "Deborah ran the board like her personal fiefdom. We are trying to reform things, make the HOA more transparent and accountable." "I appreciate that," I said. I never had a problem with the community itself, just with the harassment and the overreach. We have also revised our bylaws to clarify property boundaries and fee assessments. We brought in a new attorney who specializes in HOA law, and he has been cleaning up a lot of questionable practices. The settlement money came through as agreed, in 3 installments. I used part of it to pay Robert's legal fees, which were substantial but worth every penny. I used another chunk to upgrade my security system, not just cameras but also motion sensors and better locks on all my outbuildings. The rest I put into savings, figuring I had earned it after years of stress and harassment. Life slowly returned to normal. I got back to farming, selling vegetables at the farmer's market and to local restaurants. The tractor ran fine, no damage from its brief time in HOA custody. I even had a few people from Cedar Ridge Estates come out to buy vegetables, and they were all friendly and respectful. About 6 months after the trial, I got a letter in the mail from Deborah Patterson. It had been forwarded from the county detention center. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter was handwritten, several pages long. Deborah apologized profusely for what she had done, explained that she had been under a lot of stress from family issues and had let the HOA presidency go to her head. She acknowledged that she had been wrong, that she had let her desire for control override common sense and decency. She asked for forgiveness, though she said she did not expect it or deserve it. I read the letter twice, trying to decide how I felt. Anger seemed pointless now. The legal system had done its job. Deborah had been held accountable. Holding on to rage would only hurt me. I wrote a brief reply. I told Deborah I accepted her apology and hoped she would use this experience to become a better person. I did not say we were friends or that everything was forgotten, but I tried to offer a small measure of grace. A month later, I got a response thanking me for my kindness and saying the letter had meant a lot to her. By the time summer rolled around again, the whole incident felt like a distant memory. I had good relationships with my neighbors. The new HOA board left me alone, and my farm was thriving. I had even started dating someone, a woman named Grace Miller who worked as a veterinarian in Helena. She had heard about the tractor case, thought it was hilarious that I had gotten the HOA president arrested, and asked me out after buying vegetables at the farmer's market. One Saturday morning in July, Grace and I were having breakfast on my porch when a car pulled up my driveway. It was Mark Thompson from the HOA board. "Hope I am not interrupting," Mark said as he got out of his car. "Not at all. What brings you out here? I wanted to give you this in person." He handed me an envelope. Inside was a check for $12,000. "What is this?" I asked, confused. "The HOA board voted to compensate you for legal fees and stress beyond what the settlement covered. We also wanted to apologize formally for years of harassment. That money comes from a special assessment we levied on ourselves, the board members. It is not coming from general HOA funds." I was genuinely touched. "Mark, you do not have to do this. We settled everything." "We know, but it is the right thing to do. You were treated horribly for years and you handled it with more grace than most people would have. This is our way of saying we recognize that and we are sorry." I accepted the check and shook Mark's hand. After he left, Grace looked at me with a smile. "That was nice of them." "Yeah, it was. Maybe there is hope for HOAs after all." "Do not get carried away," she laughed. We finished breakfast and spent the day working in the garden. It was a perfect Montana summer day, warm but not too hot, with a light breeze carrying the scent of growing things. As I worked the soil that afternoon, I thought about everything that had happened over the past year. It had been stressful, expensive, and time-consuming. But in the end, the system had worked. The law had protected my property rights. The court had held someone accountable for breaking the law. And even better, the community had learned from the experience and made changes to prevent it from happening again. That evening, I drove into town to deposit the check Mark had given me. As I walked out of the bank, I ran into Amanda Pierce, the reporter who had first covered the story. "Ian Morrison, how have you been?" "Pretty good, Amanda. Quiet life, just how I like it." "I heard the HOA board gave you additional compensation. That was a nice gesture." "Word travels fast. Small community." "Hey, I have been meaning to ask, any regrets about how everything went down?" I thought about that for a moment. "No, I do not think so. I wish it had not been necessary. I wish Deborah had not made the choices she made. But I do not regret standing up for my property rights. Sometimes you have to fight for what is yours." "Good answer. And for what it is worth, your case has had ripple effects." I have been tracking HOA disputes across Montana, and several people have used your case as precedent to push back against HOA overreach. "You kind of became an accidental advocate for property rights." I laughed. "That was not my intention, but I will take it." As I drove home that evening, past the Cedar Ridge Estates with its neat rows of houses and well-maintained roads, I felt a sense of peace. The subdivision looked beautiful in the evening light, and I could see families in their yards, kids playing, people enjoying the summer weather. It was a nice community, and I bore them no ill will. My fight had never been with the community itself, just with the abuse of power by one person who had let authority go to her head. And now that was resolved, everyone could move on. Back at my property, I parked my truck and walked out to check on the evening chores. The tractor sat in the barn, right where it belonged, ready for tomorrow's work. The garden was producing well, the chickens were healthy, and life was good. Grace was coming over later for dinner, and I needed to start cooking. But first, I stood for a moment looking out over my 5 acres, my small piece of Montana that I had fought to protect. The evening sun cast long shadows across the fields, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear the sound of a neighbor's dog barking and kids laughing. This was why I had fought. Not for revenge, not to hurt anyone, but simply to preserve my right to live peacefully on my own land, to make my own choices, to not be subject to the arbitrary authority of people who thought they knew better. Property rights matter. The rule of law matters. And sometimes, standing up for those principles means going through difficulty and conflict. But it is worth it. As I walked back to the house to start dinner, I felt grateful for a lot of things. For Deputy Marcus Harrison and Detective Sarah Morales, who had taken my complaint seriously and investigated thoroughly. For Robert Chen, who had fought hard for me in court. For Judge Barbara Hartman, who had clearly understood what was at stake. For Amanda Pierce and the other journalists who had told the story fairly. And even for the new HOA board, who had shown that organizations can change and improve. Most of all, I was grateful to live in a place where the legal system, for all its flaws and frustrations, ultimately worked. Where a regular guy with a legitimate grievance could get justice. Where property rights were taken seriously and protected. That night, over dinner with Grace, I told her about my encounter with Amanda Pierce and the conversation about property rights. "You know what is funny," Grace said. "Before I met you, I never really thought much about HOAs or property rights or any of that. It all seemed like boring legal stuff. But hearing your story, living through it with you these past few months, I have realized how important it is." "How so?" "Well, we all have things we care about, right? For you it is your land, your ability to farm and live independently. For me it is my veterinary practice, my ability to treat animals the way I think is best. We all need space to live our lives according to our own values. And when some organization or authority tries to take that away, even with good intentions, it is worth fighting back. That is exactly it, I said. The HOA probably thought they were doing the right thing, maintaining standards and property values. But they forgot that not everyone wants or needs their help. Some of us just want to be left alone. We talked late into the night about property rights and freedom and community, and all the complicated ways those things intersect. It was the kind of conversation you can only have after going through something difficult, when abstract principles become concrete and personal. The next morning, I was up early again, back to my normal routine. Coffee, check the weather, plan the day's work. Everything was as it should be. The tractor started on the first try, the engine purring smoothly. I spent the morning plowing the far field, preparing it for a late summer planting. As I worked, I saw a few cars drive by on Palmer Drive, Cedar Ridge residents heading to work or running errands. A couple of them waved and I waved back. It felt normal, neighborly, the way it should have felt all along. Around noon, I took a break and was sitting on my porch drinking water when my phone rang. It was a number I did not recognize, but I answered anyway. Mr. Morrison. This is Jennifer Walsh, the assistant county attorney. Hello, Jennifer. What can I do for you? I wanted to let you know that Deborah Patterson was released this morning. She served her full 6-month sentence with good behavior. As part of her release conditions, she is required to stay away from you and your property. But I thought you should know she is out. I appreciate the heads up. Do you think there will be any problems? I do not anticipate any. She seems genuinely remorseful, and her probation officer says she is complying with all the conditions. But if you have any concerns or if she contacts you, let me know immediately. I will. Thanks, Jennifer. After hanging up, I sat for a while thinking about Deborah. 6 months in jail must have been hard for someone like her, someone used to being in control and respected in the community. I hoped she had learned something, that the experience had given her perspective. But that was not my concern anymore. My job was just to live my life and let her live hers, as long as she stayed away from my property. The summer passed peacefully. My vegetables sold well at the farmer's market, and I picked up a few new restaurant clients. Grace and I grew closer, spending most weekends together either at my place or hers. Life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. In September, I got an invitation in the mail to attend the Cedar Ridge Estate's annual meeting. It was the first time I had ever been invited to an HOA event. The invitation, signed by Mark Thompson, explained that they wanted to formally present me with a Community Appreciation Award for demonstrating the importance of property rights and good governance. I was not sure about going. Part of me wanted to just stay away from anything HOA-related forever. But Grace convinced me it would be a good gesture, a way to show there were no hard feelings, and that the community had moved past the conflict. The meeting was held in the community center, a nice building at the heart of Cedar Ridge Estates. When I walked in, I was surprised by the warm reception. People I had never met came up to introduce themselves, thank me for standing up to the old board, tell me they had always thought the harassment was wrong but did not know how to stop it. Mark Thompson gave a speech about the changes the HOA had made over the past year, the new bylaws, the improved financial transparency, the better communication with residents. Then he called me up to the front. Ian Morrison has been our neighbor for many years, Mark said to the assembled crowd. And for too long, we treated him not as a neighbor but as an adversary. That was wrong, and it took a serious legal situation to make us recognize it. Ian had every right to sue our HOA out of existence. Instead, he accepted a fair settlement and moved on with his life. He showed us grace we did not deserve, and for that, we are grateful. He handed me a plaque with a nice inscription about property rights and community values. People applauded, and several residents came up afterward to shake my hand and apologize personally for not speaking up sooner. It was, honestly, more emotional than I expected. These were good people, just regular folks trying to live their lives and maintain a nice community. They had been let down by poor leadership, but they had corrected course when it mattered. On the drive home, Grace said, "That was really nice." You could tell they meant it. Yeah, it was. I am glad I went. So you have forgiven them? I thought about that. I think so. I mean, I have not forgotten what happened, but holding on to anger at this point would just be exhausting. They have made changes, paid compensation, shown genuine remorse. What more can you ask for? That is very mature of you. Well, I had a good example, I said, squeezing her hand. As fall turned to winter, I prepared my property for the cold months ahead. The tractor got a full service and winterization. The barn was stocked with hay and feed. The house was sealed up tight against the Montana wind. One evening in November, almost exactly a year after the tractor had been stolen, I was sitting by the fire reading when I heard a knock on the door. I was not expecting anyone, and it was late, almost 9 p.m. I looked through the window and saw a woman standing on my porch. It took me a moment to recognize her. Deborah Patterson. My first instinct was to call the police. She was violating her probation by being on my property. But something made me pause. She looked different, smaller somehow, less imposing than I remembered. She was not dressed in her usual stylish clothes, but in a simple coat and jeans. Her hair was shorter, less carefully styled. Against my better judgment, I opened the door but stayed inside, keeping the screen door between us. "Mr. Morrison," she said quietly, "I know I am not supposed to be here. I am violating my probation just by being here, and you would be completely justified in calling the police. But I wanted to talk to you face to face just once before I move away. You are moving to Oregon. My daughter lives there, and I am going to help her with her kids. I cannot stay here after everything that happened. Too many memories, too much shame. Deborah, you should not be here. If your probation officer finds out, I know, but please just give me 5 minutes, then I will leave and you will never see me again." I hesitated, then stepped out onto the porch, leaving the door open behind me in case I needed to get back inside quickly. "Okay, 5 minutes. Thank you." She took a deep breath. "I wanted to apologize in person. I know I already sent you a letter, and I know words are not enough to make up for what I did, but I needed to look you in the eye and tell you how sorry I am. I got your letter, and I appreciate the apology. I was wrong, Mr. Morrison, about everything. I convinced myself that I was protecting property values, maintaining community standards, doing what was best for Cedar Ridge. But really, I was just on a power trip. I liked being in charge, liked people coming to me with problems, liked being important. And when you would not bend to my authority, I took it personally. Deborah, I understand that people make mistakes. It was more than a mistake. It was a deliberate choice, over and over again, to harass you and make your life difficult. And then stealing your tractor, that was just insane. I knew it was wrong when I was doing it. I knew it could blow up in my face. But I was so angry, so determined to win, that I did it anyway. We stood in silence for a moment. The night air was cold, and our breath made clouds in the darkness. The 6 months I spent in jail gave me a lot of time to think, Deborah continued, about who I had become, about what really matters in life. I lost my position in the community, lost friends, damaged my relationship with my family. All because I could not let go of a petty dispute with a neighbor who just wanted to be left alone. "I appreciate you coming here and saying all this," I said. "And I do forgive you, Deborah. I meant that in my letter. You made bad choices and you paid the price for them. I hope you can move forward and have a good life." Deborah's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. That means more than you know." She turned to go, then looked back. "You were right, by the way, about everything. Morrison Lane is your road. You do not owe the HOA anything, and we had no right to treat you the way we did. I wish I had listened to the lawyers who tried to tell me that years ago. Would have saved everyone a lot of pain. Water under the bridge now. Yes, I suppose it is. Goodbye, Mr. Morrison. And truly, thank you for your grace." I watched her walk to her car and drive away, then went inside and called Jennifer Walsh, the prosecutor. I left a voicemail explaining what had happened, and saying that while I appreciated Deborah's apology, she had violated her probation by coming to my property. I would leave it up to the court to decide what, if anything, to do about it. Jennifer called me back the next morning. "Thanks for reporting that, Ian. I am going to document it, but given the circumstances and the fact that she is leaving the state with permission from her probation officer, I do not think we need to pursue a violation. She will be Oregon's problem now, and frankly, it sounds like she has learned her lesson." I think she has. She seemed genuinely remorseful. "Good, and how are you doing? Everything settled down for you?" "Yeah, life is good, no complaints. Glad to hear it. You take care, Ian." That winter was one of the best I could remember. The farm was doing well. My relationship with Grace was getting serious, and I had peace of mind knowing the legal disputes were behind me. The settlement money had given me financial security, and the new HOA board was living up to their promises to leave me alone. In December, Grace and I got engaged. We decided to get married the following summer, a small ceremony on my property with close friends and family. As we made plans, I reflected on how much my life had changed in just over a year. The fight over the tractor had been stressful and difficult, but it had also clarified what mattered to me. Property rights, yes, but more than that, the freedom to live according to my own values. And in fighting for that freedom, I had connected with people who shared those values. Robert Chen, Marcus Harrison, Amanda Pierce, and ultimately Grace. Sometimes conflict, as much as we try to avoid it, leads to growth and positive change. The old HOA board had needed to be challenged, and the community had benefited from the reforms that followed. Deborah had needed to face consequences for her actions, and by all appearances, she had learned from them, and I had learned too. I had learned that standing up for what is right, even when it is hard and expensive and stressful, is worth it. I had learned that most people are fundamentally decent and will support you if you are in the right. And I had learned that grace and forgiveness, offered at the right time, can help everyone move forward. Spring came early that year, and I spent March and April preparing fields and starting seedlings. The tractor ran perfectly, no lingering issues from its brief time in HOA custody. Every time I climbed into the driver's seat, I felt a little surge of satisfaction, knowing I had fought for it and won it back. Grace moved into the house in May, bringing her 2 dogs and a sense of warmth and life that the place had been missing. We worked together in the garden, planned the wedding, and talked about our future. She had ideas about expanding the farm, maybe adding some goats or sheep, and I was open to it. It felt good to have a partner, someone to share the work and the dreams. The wedding in July was perfect. We held it in the garden, with about 50 guests including friends, family, and several people from Cedar Ridge Estates. Mark Thompson gave a toast about how the community was lucky to have such principled neighbors, which got a good laugh and warm applause. Even my lawyer, Robert Chen, came to the wedding. "I do not usually get invited to client weddings," he joked, "but I guess successfully defending someone's property rights creates a special bond." As Grace and I danced at the reception, under strings of lights hung between trees, I looked around at all the people who had supported us through the difficult times. This was what community was supposed to be. People coming together to celebrate, support, and care for each other. Not petty rules and power struggles, but genuine connection and mutual respect. Late that night, after all the guests had left and Grace had fallen asleep, I walked out to the barn one last time. The tractor sat in its usual spot, solid and reliable. I ran my hand along its side, remembering the morning I had discovered it missing, the anger and violation I had felt. That moment seemed like a lifetime ago now. So much had changed, mostly for the better. The fight had been worth it, not just for me, but for everyone involved. The HOA was better run. The community was more aware of property rights and legal limits, and Deborah Patterson was hopefully building a better life in Oregon. As for me, I had my land, my freedom, my tractor, and now a wife who understood and shared my values. I had fought for what was mine and won. But more importantly, I had shown that it was possible to stand up to abuse of authority, to insist on justice, and to come out the other side not bitter or angry but hopeful and content. The stars were bright over Montana that night, scattered across the sky in patterns I had known since childhood. I stood there for a while, breathing in the cool night air, feeling grateful for everything I had and everyone who had helped me keep it. Then I locked up the barn, walked back to the house where my wife was sleeping, and went to bed with the deep satisfaction of a man who had fought the good fight and won.